This is Erin Swenson. I am I am a Presbyterian minister and a marriage and family therapist. I have been practicing for about 43 years, and 25 of those years, the last 25, have been in the area of gender. So I would technically consider myself to be a gender specialist. I counsel people of all ages related to their gender identity. I do assist with gender transitions and help write letters and participate on treatment teams for gender transition, for medical treatment for gender transition. So just so you know who I am and where I come from. One of the things that you probably do need to know, and this does impact my work as a therapist, is that I am also transgender identified. I transitioned in on 1994 through 96, and my work with people who are transgender and gender nonconforming really dates from that time. It does impact my work as a therapist because people who come to me typically are already have already self-diagnosed as having gender dysphoria and therefore being in need of treatment, and they're looking to me for help with that. That doesn't mean that I can always help them. Very often we'll have to refer them elsewhere, but that's my practice. I actually love working with the transgender community. Working with TGNC folks has turned out to be a joyful experience for me. For one thing, it's a very highly motivated population. As opposed to depressed teenagers or alcoholic middle-aged men, people who are transgender and who are actually considering gender transition are generally very highly motivated. As a group, I have found them to often be very spiritually sensitive as a group. This may be because I'm identified openly as a Presbyterian minister and people self-select me for that reason as well. But I really don't think so. I think that there is a kind of a kinship between spiritual sensitivity and gender identity, which leads many folks down that path who have both gender identity issues and deep spiritual sensitivity. It's a great opportunity to do good. Having worked with all kinds of people over my 42 years of practice, many patients take months or years to move very far. And one of the things that really happens with people who are transgender is because they're highly motivated, they tend to really want to do the work, and they want to do it in a timely manner. If you're a therapist or someone who works as a counselor, like a pastor or a Christian educator or a rabbi or an imam or an imama, you will find in transgender folks something that will be very satisfying if you like results. Families are especially challenging within the transgender community, and so I'm going to actually start out with a few of the qualities that are important for practitioners to use when working with families, especially with children. I'm going to divide this up into two sections. The first, we're going to talk about WPATH and which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH. The access is www.wpath.org. There are a number of resources available there, not the least of which is a booklet which you can download in PDF form called The Standards of Care. A wealth of information related to gender transition and medical treatment. The other thing that you probably need to know about WPATH is that that they are doing a global education initiative which offers certification courses for those who are interested in adding the skill set of gender specialists to their work. I don't believe that you have to be a licensed therapist. I think that ordained ministers and rabbis and imams and other credentialed religious workers can enter that program as well. So you might want to look at that if you're interested. It takes a while. It's quite exhaustive. It goes into great depth. I have actually had the privilege of teaching in some of their courses, which is really an honor for me to do. Where I'd like to dive in, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about families and children, because in terms of spiritual care, we're finding that more and more children, and by children I mean all the way up to the age of 18, all the way up to 17 inclusive, are coming out and seeking gender transition services. We're not going to go in depth on that, but I want to cover some of the sort of high-level criteria that are really important in working with these families. And then we're going to move into the specifically spiritual thing, so that you have an opportunity to hear how I work with the spiritual questions and issues that get raised in the helping relationship with transgender people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what comes, and these are going to come right straight out of the standards of care. I should have gotten the reference for you so you could look it up, but it's pretty easy. It's in the mental health section. But these are eight very important things that are important to remember about the role of the helping professional with families with transgender children, and probably transgender adults as well. I think these are very well taken for both children and adults. The first is, and this is the most important, that the role of the helping professional is to help families have an accepting and nurturing response to the concerns of their gender dysphoric family member, especially children and adolescents. Some parents really need help from the very beginning with this, because they're frightened and they're afraid that their child is going to have a miserable life and they're going to fall into the pit of despair because of the gender issue. And it's very, very important to keep a very positive attitude and help the parents to become accepting and nurturing toward their child. We can deal with specific problems as we go down the road, but to be accepting of the child is most important. One of the things we know for sure is that children that experience, transgender children and adolescents who experience rejection by their parents fare very poorly in the long run. Many of them wind up leaving home. Many of them have shortened lifespans. Many are subjects of suicide and drugs and alcohol. You don't want to go down that path. So when parents talk about their transgender or gender dysphoric child or adolescent, the first thing to do is to congratulate them on having a family where someone can be free to express themselves so openly. Secondly, is sort of like that then, is to work on reducing the individual's stress or distress related to their gender dysphoria. Everybody who is gender dysphoric is distressed. The world does not accept gender dysphoric people. The general outlook has always been very negative. And so it's really, really important to address that and to help reduce the level of distress by providing an evaluation, helping them to understand that there's help available wherever it is they're going to go with this, and that we have lots of experience, which we have. We've been treating children, adolescents, and adults with gender dysphoria for decades. It's not some brand new thing. One thing to remember, and this is number 3, trying to change a person's gender identity or expression, trying to change that has been in disrepute for a very long time. It has proven to be unsuccessful no matter what is told to you by people who purport to be experienced professionals who help people change their gender expression. It is not a good idea, and such treatment is, by every professional association and licensing board, considered to be unethical. So professionals who practice this way can be brought up on ethics charges and prosecuted in that way. So please remember that's very, very important. It should almost go without saying, but unfortunately there are still a number of people, because people are very distressed, and because people feel very vulnerable, especially with their transgender child, they're looking for people who offer the kind of help that they think will make things all better. And this kind of help doesn't do that. It does not work. So please don't go in that direction, nor encourage anyone to go in that direction. Families should always be supported in managing uncertainty and anxiety. The future for a person who's gender dysphoric, especially a child or adolescent, is very, very challenging. So one of the things that really is important is to help the dysphoric person feel a positive sense, develop a positive self-concept, to really work on helping that person to understand how important they are to their family, how their gender identity issues do not disqualify them from the human race, and in fact bring them membership in a very large group of people who are, among them are quite accomplished individuals who contribute greatly to the world, who have successful families, careers, and life can be good. Something that is also important for you to remember is that it's really, really important to resist the temptation to impose a binary view of gender. If you're like me, if you're in my age group, I'm 73. If you're a boomer or anyone who is younger than that, all the way down to a millennial, you were raised with the idea that there are men and then there are women. There are males and then there are females. There are only 2 options, hence the bathroom decision that most people have to make. And we have learned painfully within the last several decades that is not only incorrect, it is not a useful way to look at gender identity and even human sexuality. So try to resist the temptation to present a binary view of gender. if you can do lots of things about that. You can add to your intake forms if you're a formal therapist. You can add different, besides male and female on the form. I mean, one of the things you might consider doing is just removing the sex question altogether. I doubt that you actually refer to it very much anyway, and so you could just take it out of there. Or if you insist, or if there's a medical reason to keep it there, you can add other options, such as simply an other gender box, or even leave a possibility for someone to check other and enter their own description of their gender identity. But it's very, very, and the other thing you can do is stop using gendered bathrooms. Gendered bathrooms are they're a disease that our culture has gotten, which insists that we have to have one or the other. And I have to tell you that as a transgender individual, it is daunting when my gender expression isn't clear to people outside of me to go into a bathroom. I have been accosted in bathrooms by people who have thought that I was there in the wrong bathroom. I even scared a guy who thought that he was in the wrong bathroom. It was the way that I actually decided that it was time for me to transition, because I was there at the bathroom using actually the urinal of all things, and a man walked in the bathroom and looked at me and blanched and ran back out of the door. And all he had to do is take a look at what I was doing, and he would have known he was in the right place. But apparently my appearance had changed so much with my hair growing and hormones that it scared him. So I decided, it's probably time to start using the women's room. So anyway. The other thing, as a professional, as a helper, as someone who wants to be a positive influence with people, is that you're going to be challenged. You're going to be challenged to help families make difficult decisions about the expression of gender, how and when it has happened, where can this happen, how is it going to happen with school and work and the extended family, when should things transition and change. Those decisions there's no formula for those decisions. They are ones that have to be made with deep sensitivity to family issues and work issues, the person's own needs. Sometimes a person needs to do a very brief transition that ends rather quickly, simply because their life is in such chaos without the transition that we have to do that. Most people can tolerate, especially young children, can tolerate knowing when and where they can express their gender in varying and different ways. And one of the things you can do is be helpful to the family and to the child in working through those decisions. Also, be an educator and an advocate. Be there to help the family to understand, but also beyond that, be there. If you're a pastor, be there to help educate church school teachers, so that they understand what it means when Johnny comes in and wants to play in the women's clothing in the clothes box in the preschool Sunday school classroom. Advocate, be ready to go into the school and help teachers and principals and even school boards to understand how important it is to understand and support children who are gender dysphoric, so that they can live full and useful lives. The final thing is to really develop a long-term relationship, not necessarily as a professional. One of the things that is my pet peeve are therapists who think that their transgender patients need to come and see them weekly for 6 months or a year before they're ready to begin medical treatments. And there's absolutely no good clinical reason why that needs to be done um, unless there are complicating comorbidities. God, I hate that word. But if there are complicating factors that need to be addressed therapeutically, of course, that should dictate the length and the intensity of treatment. But most people can pass through the therapist's office and achieve what they need in 2 to 5 or 6 sessions, and do it quite easily. But it's important to maintain a therapeutic relationship beyond that by establishing relationships with medical professionals and the people who will interface with that person, as well as family. If you're a religious worker, maintaining connections with the people within the sphere of influence for that transgender person. Those are a few things for you to remember. And if you want to look those up, I would invite you to download the PDF version of the Standards of Care at the wpath.org website, and look up those eight dimensions of helping. So let's talk a little bit more about the spiritual dimensions, because it is extremely, extremely important. I mean, it's so important that it should always be a subject of inquiry in your work with someone who is transgender or gender nonconforming. Many people don't want to address it. For some people, they would like to think that they have no spiritual experience. Many these days have no religious background whatsoever. But you will find people who do have religious backgrounds, which are quite extensive and have a very deep influence on how they feel about their gender dysphoria and how they make decisions regarding how they go forward. So it's very important to inquire about early childhood experiences with religion. Did their families go to synagogue, or did they go to prayer, or did they go to church? As adults, as they've gotten older, have they continued to be involved in faith communities? Are they currently involved in a faith community? That you would be surprised how many people come into my office wanting help with the gender transition who are current active members of churches, even churches who have spoken out against their gender status. And of course, it's always important to do an evaluation of personal spiritual experience beyond religion, helping the person to understand how and where they connect with things that are beyond themselves. Sometimes it helps to ask people how they have experienced love as a person in their life. Where does their life feel most meaningful? What things about how they live their life seem important to pass on to their children. Those are ways of getting at spiritual experience that adults have, even when they don't have deeply religious bases. Of course, one of the things that you're going to encounter are people who do have religious conflict. And of course, religious abuse is, I had a client a very long time ago who was a family member, had a spouse and children. They were active in a church that they all loved, and this person, after much contemplation and a great deal of mental health treatment from psychiatry and all kinds of other places, and deciding that they were not going to commit suicide, decided on a gender transition, and were henceforth excommunicated from their church community. This after this person had been a church leader, Of course, what happened was the church then became engaged in helping the family separate themselves from their transgender family member, which of course removed all kinds of support for the transgender person and for the family itself, and left all kinds of damage in its wake. Religious communities um, are terrible. They're just terrible. So religious abuse can occur when a religious group or a leader, either intentionally or unintentionally, uses coercion, threats, rejection, condemnation, or manipulation to force the individual into submission of the religious views about sexuality. I mean, churches and religious communities can just assume that theirs is the only actual perspective on gender, and therefore there is nothing damaging about helping a person to reshape their individual personality into the way that the church thinks is normal. And of course, we know that that's not always true. What happens when people experience religious abuse is low self-esteem, guilt over violating religious norms, shame, losing their spirituality. I know of people who feel that if their spiritual group abuses them, that all spirituality is negative, and so they reject spirituality or religion altogether. Substance abuse. And of course, the worst of all are thoughts of suicide. You need to know that according to the most recent survey that we have, 41% of transgender adults have attempted suicide at some time in their life. 41%. That is 2 out of 5. You need to know that the percentage for the general population is less than 0.1%. So it is a very, very, very important thing. One of the other things that I really like to stress is the use of the word affirmative. Wherever you go with faith communities, and if you're looking for faith resources for your client, or you're trying to find a place to, I know pastors who know that their churches are not welcoming places for their transgender parishioners, and who the pastor actually assists the person to find a more accepting, welcoming community. And that's a very appropriate use of the pastoral office, I believe. They need to also then work on the congregation, but of course that individual's needs are paramount in those moments. But when looking for religious or faith community resources for a transgender person, it is always important to look for that word affirmative. We are looking for places that provide affirmative support for transgender and gender nonconforming people. Affirmative, which means that that place is not going to try to attempt to reshape that individual. There are, unfortunately, many communities that have really hit upon the neediness of transgender people, especially those with religious backgrounds, and advertise themselves as places that want to support your transgender family member. Please come and join our church. And then what happens is they welcome you into the church with smiles and then begin to work on you to help you accept what they think your gender expression should be. And of course, you and I know that that is not healing. When working with someone who has significant religious and faith issues, that often comes up in the very beginning of a relationship with someone. Importance should be placed early in the transition uh, toward addressing those spiritual or religious issues. My experience over the 25 years that I've done this work is that those individuals with very robust faith or spiritual backgrounds who fear that their being transgender will involve their rejection by that community and decide that they're going to abandon their spiritual and religious practice completely don't usually fare well. That kind of training, especially when applied over a lifetime, is very likely to reassert itself during times of conflict or. Hi, this is Erin again, and I think QuickTime doesn't like to record more than 30 minutes, and I become a little long-winded, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But we were talking about how important it is to address those issues, and really really help people to accept that their religious background is something that they really do need to address in order to successfully accomplish a satisfying transition that is going to be lasting for them. As I was trying to say when the tape stopped, that's an old-fashioned term. Anyway, when the recording stopped, was that some of the most difficult circumstances with particularly suicidality that I've run into have been with people who have ignored their faith background and then encountered some kind of a life crisis later on after their transition, and somehow then started to regret their transition because the spiritual tools that they needed to deal with the crisis weren't accessible to them. So it's really important that those, hopefully you will agree with me, the spiritual dimension of life is of primary importance. It should go without saying that when there are faith or spiritual issues present in someone who is transgender, that person would be best treated or worked with by someone who has the same faith background. I don't think that gender transition is really a very good time to undergo a faith transition. Although many people actually do it. I think there are a lot of transgender people who leave what they consider to be patriarchal faith groups and move toward something less patriarchal, more nativistic, and those folks actually tend to do pretty well. Actually, I participate in spirit circles once in a while myself, and find them very fulfilling. But I don't think that just it's the best time to do that. It's a good time to just sort of, you may need to take a vacation from going to church for a while, but it's very important to deal with that. Probably, in the instance that someone takes a vacation from their church or synagogue or prayer group or whatever, is a good time to take a look at their faith background. I think it's best to not ignore that, but to help the person to unpack their own faith, religious experience, and begin to try to tease out those things in that experience that are most important to them. It may be, maybe as simple as, the church has always been a loving, accepting place and a place where my family can go. Well, there are lots of places and ways to fulfill that aren't really maybe necessarily part of that particular church. You can, there are wonderful workshops in this conference regarding things like looking at scripture or religious writings, and beginning to look at them in new and different ways, so that people who say that one of the things they really value about their faith background is its faith in scripture. Well, you can be faithful to Scripture and understand Scripture if you're willing to study it with an eye toward opening your eye toward those ways in which Scripture is open to gender variant experience, and indeed it is. Believe me. It's really wonderful. Your work with transgender people in the area of faith and spirituality can be a very fulfilling experience. You don't have to be a theologian. You can be a mental health practitioner or a physician. You can be a minister or a rabbi, or an imam, and find great fulfillment in assisting your transgender people enjoy the resources of your faith that are affirmative for non-binary gender experience. And that will make you a better faith leader for the rest of your flock or community or staff at your office or wherever it is you are, because you'll become a more sensitive, aware person when it comes to gender and gender identity. We could talk about this for another 10 years, but I think we need to have some time so we can have some discussion. I'm going to end this, and we will see you on the other side.